Hi, it's great to be here. Before I begin, two quick things. First off, just thank Mr. Mariwala for having me here today. Honored that I got the invite. And secondly, the accent's not fake. I'm not just some kid from South Bombay. I actually lived in the United States. I moved here 5 years ago. So if I'm talking too fast, just raise your hand and I'll slow down and slow the language down. So all I can really do is just talk about my experience and my journey. I'm in no way or means an expert in this. I can just tell you what I did and see if it connects or it doesn't. I'll just go through my journey and feel free again to interrupt me at any point. Let's make this interactive. Happy to converse. I'm here to answer questions that you may have and see if there's anything that strikes. So just quickly on the journey, as I mentioned, I grew up in the United States. I worked in finance in New York, while I was in New York, I had an idea to do a hobby project in India, and the hobby project was with a bunch of friends as a side investment. We started an ice cream parlor called Hokey Pokey. I don't know if some of you have heard of it. You might have had the ice cream before. And being a passionate foodie, that was sort of my first exposure to India a couple years ago. There was no vision, there was no view, there was no business plan. It was simply a passion project. And I went to business school post that, and while I was in business school, I got this sort of idea, and I took a class here in India called Marketing to the Indian Consumer. And that's where there was a gentleman by the name of Shripad Nadkarni who gave a guest lecture on India and sort of the 20 years ahead, consumer brands, FMCG brands, and how there's going to be a lot of disruption. And just sitting in that sort of classroom, I got that Ghanti Baj Gayi idea, that there's something to be done over here, and there's a lot of opportunity in India for the next sort of 20 years or so. So, long story short, I graduated in 2012 from business school. It took me a year to convince who was my largest investor, which is my wife, to move to India. And that finally happened in 2013. And moved out here, like I said, 5 years ago, and set about sort of executing. And I'll talk a little bit through the business side of things rather than the fundraising side, and show you how that ties in, so you can sort of see the journey, firsthand. So we had a bunch of ice cream parlors called Hokey Pokey, and like I said, it was a side investment, a hobby investment, a passion project. But what we realized is that there was a larger sort of opportunity in FMCG, in distribution. Unorganized trade was getting organized, modern trade was coming alive, and of course we still had the kirana shops, which are strong. And more importantly, if you sort of went to a local grocery store, a kirana shop or whatnot, back in 2009, 2010, you could just pretty much see most of the brands were covered by 5 or 7 companies today, 95%. And I'm very proud to be a part of this sort of movement the last 4 or 5 years, where we've seen that disruption happen, where we had a plethora of brands come out, and we were talking earlier, many more that are coming as well. So the first thing that sort of made sense for me was, these slides are sort of up and down. We just put some slides together, so forgive the sequence. But just to give you a quick idea, so when I moved here, we had the parlors, which were the Cold Stone Creamery type ice cream parlors. We converted that into an FMCG sort of product, which we got into retail distribution. And one of the things we learned when we were doing that, and again, this is going to be relevant to fundraising because you'll see how this cycle ties in, was we were trying to figure out a market test, right? To see, is this a good market fit for the product, for the ice cream product? And what we learned was, while the ice cream business was very exciting, and I personally am a big ice cream fan, it was very seasonal in nature, especially what we wanted to do. And immediately we realized that we had to sort of pivot a little bit to figure out what next. So this brand called Epigamia, which I'm assuming some of you or many of you know of it, is India's first Greek yogurt, actually started off as an experiment to complement the ice cream business. And we launched it in 2015, so about 3 years ago. In fact, 2 weeks is our three-year-old birthday. And the product took off to a great success. And some of the learnings we had prior to the launch of Epigamia were applied here. And then we've seen sort of the journey start then. Now we're across India. We've also launched other products, and we have more coming in the pipeline. If I could just get the next slide. So what I think what was really important, and I'm sort of, again, tying in the fundraising cycle to this, was when I moved here, what is it that we're trying to do? And what was really important was identifying the market, because identifying the market is what led me to actually move here. And as I mentioned earlier, the idea, sort of the notion of consumerism that we all know about, the 20, 30 million sort of people that we look at premium customers in the country, and sort of speaking and servicing those customers. So that's sort of the market opportunity. And what we need to do is see how we're going to test this. And for that, this sort of idea of fundraising comes about. So let me talk about that a little bit. So very clearly, and this is not a brand presentation, so I won't go too much into detail, but that Eureka moment was to build an innovative sort of FMCG brand, with innovative products. So what does that mean? So that means, and for us, given that it was ice cream and yogurt, it was creating a robust product pipeline, building a cold chain distribution, which some of you may know is a very pricey and expensive proposition. Building distribution, and then creating awareness. Now, in a consumer brand, which is very different from some of the other services industry, awareness is obviously critical. So right off the bat, at this very high level, then mind you, I haven't built the business plan yet at this point. I'm just sort of deciding to move to India, right? We're just working on that. I'm taking you back to 2013. Obviously, it was sort of in the head from the beginning that this is going to require capital. There's going to be money that's going to be required to build it. Now, when I say that very cautiously. It doesn't mean that every business needs capital, but from my perspective, the idea was not to come to India and do the startup and spend 15 years building it, which we could easily continue to do without the capital. But the idea was to build something big, build something fast, and build something that we were passionate about, which was food and food products. So given that happened, how do we go about sort of bringing this in? So instead of looking at fundraising first, the most important thing for me and my co-founder, who's Chef Ganesh, was bringing in some functional expertise. So I think I talked about this a little bit earlier. What are the areas within my organization or myself? At that time, we had a few parlors. We had a small little team, 7, 8 of us, that we needed to bring in expertise. So number one was sort of on the brand side. That was very important. Secondly, was on the production side, and I'll talk about these things a little later. The other thing was to build distribution. Building distribution in this country is obviously not an easy thing, but our business success was predicated on that. And obviously that was going to be another pricey proposition. Now we could have gone very slow, but that was something that I was aligned with when I moved here, that I wanted to achieve these goals in a short time frame. And finally, capacity and technology. So bringing sort of technology for the ice cream making as well as Greek yogurt, and then building out production capacity. So these are sort of the things that came to mind. And I think what hit first and hit home very early for me was that this piece of it, I sort of knew. I knew nothing else. But this piece of it, I knew what I needed to do and what I needed to achieve. So moving on from there, can we get the next? Actually, can I just get the clicker? Is that easier? Yeah. So how do you sort of, now that you've realized you need some sort of money to get this started, the first thing was, so I was an investment banker before, so every single dollar I had went into this business. So whatever was my savings went into this. If I didn't believe in it and I don't put my money into it, whatever I have, then no one else should. And the second source of capital is what I like to call the triple F, the friends, family, and fools. So and that was a good sort of area to get money from. Of course, there was a bunch of folks I knew through networks and through family. And essentially, we raised some money, and now this is the point when we wanted to test the market, as I told you. So at this point, we knew we wanted to be an FMCG. We wanted to do ice cream. Greek yogurt was also in the pipeline, but ice cream was first. And we wanted to build out the distribution. So this was sort of the first round, I guess, of funding, which was myself, my father, my brother, my uncles, and then also, as I mentioned, the friends and the fools who believed in us back then. And this was built on just simple sort of, I think Sandeep said it earlier, this whole realm is self, right? At this point, we're not bringing in the expertise, but we're sort of getting ourselves started. Which is the one I have to press? This one. Okay. So, friends, family, and fools. Okay. Then the other piece of it, Then the other piece of it was, as we sort of went through the journey and we kickstarted, and this is the most important piece, is who do we feel can help us build this business and take it to the next level? And I mentioned earlier that one of the gentlemen I met, when I took a class here, Shripad Natkarni, is a branding expert, so he was one individual. And then the idea here was not sort of capital. Capital was important, but this is where I needed some real help. And I think one of my learnings, and this is something I'd like to sort of tell you guys, is that whenever I've asked for advice, I've received money. And whenever I've asked for money, I've received advice. And I think that's a really important thing to note here, is that if you get the right guys to advise you, and they actually believe in you, they'll put skin in the game. And we mentioned this earlier about finding the advisors. Someone asked, how do you go about finding them? They're all around you. Today, LinkedIn is probably the best tool. I have religiously used LinkedIn just as you would to sell something, to reach out to people and get these advisors on board. But the idea for me was very clear. I made my list of who I wanted to help me. I made my list of where I needed my functional help, and I started hitting the ground and getting those guys involved. Again, capital was needed, but for me it was more important to get these right people on board that can guide me and guide the vision. And then secondly, so with that, we raised our sort of first outside round. So I'm taking myself and the friends, family, and fools outside of this. We raised our first round in January 2013 of approximately 2 crores. And here were the guys that we set out that would actually help us. So the folks that came out were a gentleman named, as I mentioned, Shripad Natkarni, a gentleman named Apurva Salarpuria, who again I religiously LinkedIn like crazy until he responded to me, and also one of my professors from undergrad. And the idea here was to understand and identify. So very clearly, this is at the market identification stage for me, for us. To see, is this market the right one, and are we aligned to it? And that's where these investors helped a lot. So we raised our first round in 2013, and again, the reason I'm bringing the business side into the fundraising, to show you what we actually did with this raise. The next round came to us a little later. So at this point, we'd sort of figured out, this is a space we want to play in, this is a space that's exciting. And then my co-founder, and I think, again, Sandeep touched upon this earlier as well, on the talent side, my co-founder, who is a chef, very different sort of risk profiles between me and him, was sort of not convinced to take the leap in the beginning. But once we got a little bit of traction and we raised this next round, he joined me full-time, and that was in 2014. Also was able to attract our current COO, and who I like to call my partner in crime, Rahul. And so Rahul had an organic milk startup business, and he met us because he was trying to sell milk to us to buy as customers. And I basically told him that I don't think this business is going to go anywhere, but I really like you. You want to join forces? And that worked out. And another interesting sort of thing when you're looking, I think some folks are talking about being individual founders. It's not just sort of your networks; it's also your business partners, your vendors. You never know where you'll find someone you want to work with. I think the idea there is to just keep an open mind. And that's where sort of Chef and Rahul joined full time. And this is when we decided that the goal now for us was market entry. So we've identified the market, and now we want to enter this market. So for us to do that was to get into FMCG distribution, as I mentioned, get into some of these stores as you've heard of. And in the beginning, it was modern trade for us. So we raised 5 crores this round. And this was now moving on from some of those mentors and getting into some of the individual investors, including some of those mentors. And I have to say, something that I look at today, I look at my cap table, and at this point in time, we spoke to a lot of sort of venture capital investors, and I'm going to talk about that a little later as well. And I'll show you some of the responses we got at this point in time. I'll take you through that as well. But at the end of the day, we knew we needed the capital. We knew we needed to move forward. So what ended up happening for us in this round is we ended up raising small amounts of money from a lot of people. So this 5 crores was almost 15 to 20 people that invested that kind of money in small chunks. Yes, it was difficult to navigate, it was difficult to manage, but I had a commitment to my partners who were joining me, and I had a commitment to building the business. So we raised this money in 2014, and the goal again was market entry. So getting into product and packaging, getting the manufacturing going, as well as getting into the stores. So this was sort of our second round of funding before the institutional round came in. And then finally, market testing. And this is where the birth of Epigamia came about. So with Hokey Pokey, everything we learned in terms of the market fit, the market test, the Indian consumer, the consumer mindset, the psyche, led us to launch Epigamia. And I'll just talk about that a little bit. And it was you know, in the course of things, it was a pretty straightforward pivot in what we needed to do. So when we reached this phase, what we realized is that the ice cream business was great. It was an amazing opportunity, but the goal was going to take 15 years to get there, given that ice cream is extremely seasonal. In the sort of monsoon season, which we're entering now, it was hard to grow distribution. The shops would tell us, "Abhi season mein aao, abhi rakhne ka ice cream." You know, gala kharab ho jata hai thand mein. So we decided that in order to complement that, we launched Epigamia, which is our Greek yogurt. And Greek yogurt was something that I've always been a fan of growing up in the United States. It was in our pipeline, but this was sort of supposed to be a complementary business. But what happened with it was that because of the advisors we had earlier and also the ability to test the market that we were able to do, we were able to realize the opportunity for this. And we sort of nailed it in terms of getting the consumer right, identifying the opportunity, and building the right products. And this is where we got to test the market. And here, very key thing for us is this round took us into Epigamia. And this is where the birth came. We started off with a dual strategy of distribution, and then also we went across the country and we expanded our capacity. So this is the phase I like to call sort of our market testing phase. And again, feel free to interrupt me at any point if you want any clarification. So at this point, which was about 3 years ago, is when the real 5-year plan came to me. Now there's always a 5-year plan, right? It's in your head. But this is when it really came to me and we realized what we really needed to do. And this is when I like to talk about the vision. So about 3 years ago, so I've been into the business for 2 years. So anyone who says that the vision is perfect from day one is lying. No one has that. It evolves, it changes, but the only thing is that evolution needs to happen fast. You know, sort of think fast and fail fast. And that's when it dawned on me what the 5-year plan should be. And this is when the reality came that institutional funding was going to be a requirement. We had the conversations with VCs earlier, but frankly, I didn't even know what I was talking about. I didn't have my plan yet. So takeaway number 2, takeaway number 1 was the advice thing, but takeaway number 2, know what you're doing when you get into those meetings. Know what you're talking about. It's not about fundraising, it's about your business. Fundraising is secondary. Business comes first, passion comes first. And I'll talk about that a little later as well. So we built this 5-year plan, and this is just a nice sort of tool that I still have in my wall at my office. And the idea was the first year that we would sort of kick this off, which is when Epigamia was born 3 years ago, was the foundation phase. And the idea behind the foundation phase was to build a team, get your resources going, and get your business strategy right. And this is the phase we had reached after that first sort of friends, family, fool round and the self-funding round. The next phase for us was the brand phase, which we just completed, by the way, in March 2018. And the idea behind the brand phase was to make Epigamia aware, at least in the major cities of this country. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have heard of Epigamia before meeting me today? That is pretty awesome. Thank you. and if I did that just 6 to 8 months ago, I would have seen maybe 2 or 3 hands. And I think that was the idea behind this phase. Our third phase is what we just entered this fiscal year, which is what I call the phase of efficiency. And the reason I'm walking you through this is that, whether you like it or not, it's important to have some sort of plan in mind when you do go to raise capital. At least that's what we did, and it made sense. And what I mean by efficiency is every year needs to have a focus. So the first year was the foundation, the second year was the brand. This year is all about efficiency for us. So efficiency means we've now built the brand a little bit, people recognize it. How can we sort of scale up our margins? We have some power with our vendors, get our profitability better, get our contribution margins better, get our unit economics extremely healthy. And that's what we're doing as we speak. Not to say that the brand isn't still getting built and we're not building distribution, but this is our core focus for this year. For the 4th year of the plan, and again I built this 3 years ago, was proficiency. So once we're 4 years into it, we better know what we're doing. So proficiency is defined as EBITDA margins, a healthy EBITDA margin. And that was sort of the goal for us in the 4th year. And the 5th year is what I like to call unleashing the beast, where the company has become something that's formidable, something that you're proud of, I'm proud of, and we can sort of, sleep well at night, because the first 4 years you don't sleep well at all. And this is sort of the vision that I set out to do, and this this was the beginning of our sort of institutional fundraising journey when this vision really came to light. And again, I reiterate that that vision would not have happened if I didn't bring in the right sort of early partners, the angel investors, the advisors. I can't stress how important those guys were to get to this stage. So coming to that, in 2016, once we'd sort of realized what the real vision was, and the focus would be Greek yogurt, not ice cream, we raised our first round of funding, which was our Series A round of 45 crores. And the goal with that funding was very clear. What was the use? The use was to get this foundation sorted and build this brand Epigamia. There was a very simplified goal. Every single person in the company, if you ask them, what is your goal today? They would all respond this. They had individual sort of goals within, functional goals, but at least at a mid-level, up to a mid-level area, everyone knew the goal. Today, if you ask any of my team members what's the goal, they'll tell you efficiency, because that's our third year of the plan. So very clearly, we realized this is what we wanted to do these first 2 years. This is going to be our focus areas, and we wanted to raise capital for that. We were fortunate enough to have some, can you just go back one slide? Yeah. Fortunate enough to have some really amazing sort of investors that invested. So Verlinvest, which is a $2.2 billion consumer-focused private equity fund, they're really well known globally, and they're the shareholders of the AB InBev Group, which is the Budweiser beer family. And they've invested in India. They've been in India for a few years, so things like Sula Wines, Burger King, Viva Foods. And what was great about them is they understood us and they understood this 5-year plan, and they knew exactly, and they were aligned with what we wanted to do. So that's who we raised from. And the other investor that was in this round was a small fund called DSG Consumer Ventures, led by a gentleman named Deepak Shalapuri, who also sort of focuses on this. This is really important because what was aligned on this front was that these investors understood our business. That's another sort of big thing for you guys as well as you start thinking through this, is that do they actually get it, or are they just there for a trend, following a trend or following a path? And this was really important because these are two investors that understood what we wanted and understood what our pitfalls were. I can't stress that enough either. They knew what they were getting with us, they knew what we were good at, they knew what we could deliver on, but they also knew what we lacked, where our pieces of the puzzle were not fitting. And it helped us a lot on that front as well. So in Series A, we raised 45 crores, and the goal was, as I mentioned, to build a foundation and to build a brand. And just quickly on the foundation piece, so for me, the foundation was getting your team right. And I think Sandeep touched upon this a little earlier. Once you have some funding, you're out there, obviously talent attraction becomes a little easier in the sense that now you have some validation, some external forces validated you. So I was able to get some really amazing people on board. There's 3 gentlemen you see up there. One on the supply chain side from Domino's Pizza, one on the marketing side from Colgate, and the third gentleman you see is actually from Chobani in the United States, who moved to India to join us on the quality front. So super exciting for us to be able to do that and attract that kind of talent. The other thing was getting some expertise. I mentioned this earlier. There's a gentleman named Mustafa Dogan, who was one of the founding members of Chobani. Chobani, by the way, is the biggest Greek yogurt company in the world, $2 billion company based in the United States. And again, I bring this back to that question someone asked earlier about how do we get these advisors. Mustafa is a fantastic example. I must have sent him 25 LinkedIn messages and requests, to which point he said, okay, let me speak to you, because otherwise I'm not going to get this guy off my back. And we had a chat, and over the conversation, he just fell in love with what we're doing. The story in India, the fact that Greek yogurt is not new to India, even though we've launched it in a new way. It's essentially Shrikand, right? I mean, I'm sure many of you have had Shrikand before. It's a lower sugar form of Shrikand. And it was compelling for him to hear that, so much so that he joined us as an advisor. So I think it's not that difficult, it just requires the effort. And I identified Mustafa because I had found about him, I read up about him, and then through LinkedIn we found him. Verlinvest guys also brought in an amazing gentleman named Prashant Chaya, who used to head up the integrated supply chain for Mondelez. He joined us as well. He's on our board now. He's also invested in the company in his personal capacity. Another great idea, another great example of when you ask for advice, you end up getting money. Prashant's a great example of that. So he came in and also invested in the company. And in this sort of Series A phase, the idea was to, as I said, build this foundation, build the resources, build the people, and then build sort of the partnerships, get the manufacturing going, get the distribution going, get the warehousing going. Which then took us to our next phase, which was building the brand. And in building the brand, the idea was to get a little bit of a pan-India reach, develop the channels, do a lot of sampling, which required capital, and then also what I like to refer to as $0 marketing, which is your sort of influencer-led campaign. So this is not a brand session, so I won't go too much into detail, but happy to answer any questions offline. And the idea for us here was very, very, very simple. We need to make Epigamia a household brand. We're still not there yet, but we're working on it. But this last 1 year, in terms of the year of the brand, we were able to succeed. Which then led us to the next round of funding, which was scaling up. And this is when we talk about that year of efficiency. So last year, we raised our Series B round of funding. We raised 90 crores. And this was the phase now when we were talking about venture debt, when someone like Innovent, who's a large venture debt provider, came into the picture. And venture debt was good for us because it fit the bill. We had a certain fundraise that we needed to have, which was 90 crores. And taking too much would have diluted us in terms of being the founders and the co-founders of the company. So we decided to partner with Innovent and raise this round with a mix of debt and equity. And I can answer, I know we covered venture debt for a while earlier, but I can answer any questions specific to me if anyone has any, feel free to ask. And then the idea behind this fundraise, this last one we did, which was about a year ago, was to focus on efficiency. And bring in, so we brought in a CFO. So Rohan joined us very recently. He was a CFO of a mid-sized FMCG company. And now the goal is margin, margin, margin. So focusing on the vendors, focusing on contribution margins. We've been able to expand our gross margins. When we did Series A funding, which were around 35%, we brought them to 48% now. This has been a function of the last the efforts for the last 6 to 8 months. And finally, also, we're now going to be entering Tier 2 cities, which helps us take advantage and get efficiencies out of our secondary distribution. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things we did was build out the distribution as part of the fundraise. So, give you a little context on that. And any questions so far? I know I've been sort of moving fast. Yeah, please.
Point to select those venture funds? Were they specialists in the line of the product?
Yes, very much. So both this venture fund and the private equity group, Verlinvest and DSG, their portfolios are focused on what we do. Their focus is on consumer food products, not just in India but globally. So as I mentioned, Sula Wines, Burger King India, Future Group. So focused on those investments, and also Verlinvest especially does a lot of stuff in the United States, so I've been following them for a while, and has made a lot of investments in companies of our scale, at our stage, and seen them sort of grow to the next level. So definitely, it was not just the capital, it was also the expertise and the focus where we partnered with them.
What was the inflection point which brought both of you together? What did they see in you as per you? And what could you put together?
So Verlinvest and DSG work very closely together, these two funds. One is a private equity fund, one is a venture capital fund. And I was in touch with this VC fund literally from the day I landed in India, which was 5 years ago. They weren't very excited about the ice cream business, but then they gave us good feedback, and Deepak has played a role in sort of shaping our vision as well. And then when they saw that this product is being launched, and then the execution is happening, and the market traction, as I mentioned, the validation has taken place, that's when they jumped in.
Pleasure.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Few more to meet up.
Yes, sure. Please.
From the story we've heard so far, I don't see or hear of any kinks. Your team formation, your vision, your...
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that later on.
So did things go wrong?
Everything went wrong. We'll talk about that later on. Yeah.
You said that you created your team, right? And that was really important. I can imagine that is what took your company ahead. And how do you choose the people in your team? And generally, when you're choosing somebody, I'm sure they are your core team, right? So they must be having equity and a balance of everything. So generally, it takes time to field in this different countries. So how do you choose the right person at the right time and say that, I'm going to work with this person like for a long time? This is the guy that I need to handle this part of it. Like, what is it that you look for?
Yeah.
What do you look for?
That's a great question. So, and I have a very relevant answer. So, this is kind of related to both of you now. So one of the things that went wrong is going to come later. We were sort of one of the things that our newly formed board did was force feed one or two candidates onto the company. And sort of being naive in the beginning, we decided to take that on. So we received one gentleman, and I won't go into too much detail, who was thoroughly experienced. I mean, if you look at that resume, you start salivating. You know, like, this is the guy I want working with us, right? Perfect on paper, perfect in the interview, was a disaster. Was a complete disaster for us. He was with us for about a year. Both of us, I mean, literally at the end of the 1 year, looked at each other like, we're going the other way. And I think that the problem and the challenge we have is that we sort of tend to look at these book covers and judge who's going to join us and what it is. But I think what's worked for us, and I know everyone in here has it. In fact, when I was seeing Sandeep's presentation earlier, I didn't realize how many really solid, mature businesses we have here. Frankly, all I can tell you is that the gut calls have worked. Where we've taken decisions where within that first 5 minutes, I've enjoyed working with that person. And I know that person's going to enjoy working with me. It's worked. Against the wishes of many of my advisors and investors, bringing on people with no experience, for example. I also come with no experience in this field. They've been some of the best assets we have today. We can't do without them. And then here you have someone with one of the most amazing sort of resumes and portfolios. And statistically speaking, this is the one who's supposed to succeed. Complete disaster and nightmare. So I think that chemistry at the management team level is so critical. And yes, I'm sort of the largest promoter shareholder. I'm the CEO. But at the end of the day, the guys I brought in are also partners. So giving them that onus, that responsibility to say that, look, you're coming on. Yes, on the hierarchy, you report to me, but we're partners. We're going to do this together. We're in this together. We're going to win together. And I think the guys that have fit, and I just showed you the successful ones. So we've gone through like 12 of these people. But the ones that have worked were the ones that now I realized stick to your gut. I think sticking to my gut has always worked, and I'm going to continue doing that. But learned through a lot of failures and the wrong hirings and things of that nature. But I think my takeaway is the guys who are with us, who are kicking ass, were the ones within the first 5 minutes I knew would be the partners. Yeah.
So you know how your sort of product focus changed from ice cream to Greek yogurt. So did that affect your valuation with every round of fundraising?
So we did that prior to this round, this first institutional round. So it had already happened. Before that was just sort of the FFF and the self sort of funding.
Right, but even for that, to give them some sort of equity, obviously, there would have been some valuation. So how did that...
In this round? In the first round?
Yeah.
The first? So, no, in fact, it was the other way around. Because of the pivot, the pivot was not a pivot in the business model, the pivot was in the product. So the business model remained the same. The distribution remained the same. The distributors remained the same. The trucks remained the same. So the pivot was not, if that answers your question. So, in fact, we had built the traction in terms of our distribution, in terms of our reach, in terms of our servicing of customers. So that had the merit that gave us our first round of funding. The only difference was that we had changed the product strategy, which was because we saw this as a much larger and bigger scalable fit. So it wasn't the business model that changed?
But also then sort of how much had you, I mean, obviously you don't have to disclose that if you want. But
how much did we dilute in the first round? So I think it's the typical numbers you heard earlier. Right. You know, the 20-25% pretty much. So whatever Sandeep said earlier, every round has been aligned with that more or less. Yep.
So you've taken money from F&F and you're putting your own personal money. So when you raise the next round, were you able to return the money? Does this money get...
Great question. So it's not returning money because I didn't take debt, I took equity. It was if they wanted to exit. And in this first round of funding, not one of our angels exited. None of them wanted to exit. They just saw an amazing opportunity. This last round, a few of them exited. They were bought out by some of these institutional guys. But in our first round of funding, they just saw an amazing vision, especially with the new product that had been launched. So not one angel exited in the first round.
No, not on the angel, I'm talking about friends and family.
None of them exited. I'm putting them in the same bucket. Not one. In fact, I have a couple of uncles who I insisted on taking their money back. And then I told them, now this is at your risk going forward. But no one exited in that first round. But the option was there. Yep.
Having the journey of shifting from an ice cream company to Greek to go to company, how mentally that journey was, that I'm ICT company and shifting tomorrow towards Uber's company.
Yeah. So I think, see, I don't think there was again, there wasn't a shift in business model, right? Within food, distribution, etc. On the sourcing side, it was still dairy. In fact, the same ingredients that we get, our mangoes come from Ratnagiri, strawberries come from Panchgani. The same sourcing was done for ice cream and this. So fundamentally, that didn't change much. What changed was that we realized a larger opportunity in a lifestyle brand, and a brand that spoke for sort of healthier eating. So the trend that we saw, and I don't want to take this because this focus of today's session is fundraising, but the trend that we saw was functional, fresh snacking. That's the area that we saw, and that's where we launched these products. So in the sense that it wasn't a crazy pivot of sorts because it was already happening on the back end, it was just a shift in product focus, if that makes sense. The culture still remained the same. Let me just take this one over here. I know I got you ready. Go ahead.
Sandeep just spoke about being looking for investments. He sees that there is a definite competitive advantage or something, a differentiating factor. So when you were talking to these investors, what was the competitive advantage or the differentiating factors you showed them?
So I mean, we didn't have any rocket science technology in the back of our cards, if that's what you're asking. But I think what he was talking about was cutting across. So what they saw was a team that they believed in that could execute. They saw the opportunity, of course. The product. So my co-founder is a chef, so the product was something big. And overall, I think they just had a belief that this 5-year vision that we set out to do, we would be able to execute on. That we could take on competition and build our edge given these few parameters. And then our brand strategy was very strong. That was something that we've been focused on from day one. So I wouldn't say it'd just be one, I'd say it'd be a combination of these that they saw as sort of differentiation from what else is out there.
Because as an investor, when I put up that hat, one of your bigger competitors would be an HLS, which one day decides to get into something like this.
Yeah.
They can put in tons of money.
Yeah, so I mean, I think every tech business Google can do, right? And so can Facebook. So I think it's the same thing. And those were and you know, I think we've had that same conversation with many people. So Amol can do it, Bharat can do it. The reality is, it's not about what they can do and what we can do. It's about how the market we're focused on. So for us, it was always about the target audience. We knew we wanted to focus on the millennial. So as I said earlier, our brand strategy was very potent. We wanted to be clean label. We wanted to be fresh. So these are some salient points. It's not about who can or cannot do it. It's about who can execute. I think that's what's important.
Thank you. Because
Yep.
I'm seeing it from my point of view. Not
Yeah,
yours.
yeah. Yeah, please. Let me just take him and then I'll come back to you. Oh.
Hey.
Yeah.
So when you started looking for funding aggressively, did you have an investment banker that built the business plan and the numbers as they would like to see it? And how did you identify the right investment banker, partner for you to help you build the plan?
So none of the business plan and the strategic work was all done by us and the team. We did in the first round work with the bank, but it was more so from a paperwork perspective and a compliance perspective, because as you can imagine, this process takes a lot out of it, right? And as a CEO, one can be perpetually fundraising, which is not what you should be doing. You should be focused on the business. So I think as we were told earlier, it's not about it's about what you want to get out of it. So for us, it was very clear. We knew these guys already. It wasn't that we needed them to open up doors for us. We had all the relationships. I think for us, it was more on the bandwidth side. So we worked with one for that.
So as an entrepreneur, do you suggest that you do the due diligence of finding the right potential investors yourself and look at an investment banker just to get the numbers and in the right format?
So absolutely. So my suggestion would be first identify the investors, and it's pretty open. I mean, there's a handful of them. I mean, our friend over here is sitting. So there's identify who the right guys are. So and you'll know who the right fit for you is because what other deals have they done? What expertise do they bring? So you'll know that. In terms of hiring a bank or not, so I'll take a little bit of a different view. In Series A, your first round, if you can go without one, I don't think there's a need. I frankly, we didn't have any great value add except for the paperwork. If you have massive bandwidth issues, then yes, but then negotiate your fees accordingly. Yes.
My query has been is in relation to your second part of answer, more of the corporate compliances.
Yeah.
How has been your experience with compliances? You have MCA at one side, you have RBI, you have FEMA, FERA, ECB requirements, more than 3 years, less than 3 years, more than $10 million, less than 10 million. Whole lost, and it's mind-boggling. So
yeah, so
how would you?
I have decided that if this venture doesn't work, I'm starting my own consulting practice. So
that's a good scope.
in fact,
but if you can share your insights
yeah,
so that
yeah.
all those who are aspiring for can do their homework
Yeah.
on those areas.
So I think what you're trying to say is that it's extremely tedious, which it is. And you know, I think when we were actually going through this, and this happened to us during due diligence, we didn't cover that, but during due diligence, you know, Factories Acts from 1965 came up, right? Who I can tell you right now, 99% of the companies in this country don't follow. But we also had a European Belgian investor, which was by the book, which is good. I mean, it's good to have that. So a lot of these came up. I think the reality is, and I'm going to answer your question, is what is sort of necessary and what's relevant and what is required. And that's where I think we had conversations with the investors. There's certain things that are, you have to follow no matter what. Now, there's a rule from 1921 pre-British era that still is in the books, by the way, and you're not following it. Yeah, that's a conversation we can have. But things like FEMA, things like the Companies Act, have become religion for us. And fortunately or unfortunately, I have become quite an expert, and I can answer questions if asked. But I think what's more important is that the compliance piece of it is not just I think what's important is that as a company, right? You're building an organization. You're trying to build an institution, which hopefully will stand the test of time. And a key characteristic of that is following the rule of law. I think we get carried away trying to always find ways around it. So while compliance, I can tell you, was a nightmare, I'm really happy and I'm really proud that we're right aligned with everything. And we had to follow some rules that have been around for many years. Now the investors have said, okay, fair enough, we understand this is not that relevant, but at least the ones that are have become religion for us. Yeah, sure. Anyone else? No. How much time? Done?
5 minutes?
Okay, so let's just quickly go through. So here's what a slide that was going to address what you said. So I think a lot of the first sort of challenge was this product market fit, as we talked about, right? So we saw the seasonality in the business. We saw the change from ice cream to Greek yogurt. That was a big pivot for us. But there was some of those guys that came in early before the institutional round were critical in us identifying this. So rather than them come back to us and say, we invested in ice cream, how can you, what is this nonsense? Why are you doing this? They were actually part of this process. And that ties back to some of the things that we talked about earlier during Sandeep's session as well, is that these investors are your partners. One of the things that I think that I've been able to do so far, which has worked really well, is treat them like partners. Update them, talk to them, laugh with them, and cry with them. And I cry a lot with them, but that's part of the game, right? I mean, because if they're not your partners, then they're going to start accusing you. Why did this happen? Why did that happen? So I think someone asked that question about the infrastructure issue about one of the investors saying 4 years later they wanted their money back. But we never had that issue because they were always aligned with us. We always included them in the process, and we continue. Now, of course, there's a formalized board, and we follow the board protocol. But even back then, we had that. I think one of the other things we had was the space that we're in, which is referred to as the offline space, which is not very attractive in sort of venture capital. At least it wasn't when we were fundraising. And we went through this place where a lot of, and I've also got a interesting slide to show you after this, where this sector was something that no one wanted to touch, and it was tough. We had to go through a lot of iterations, a lot of discussions. Then we came to a phase where then this is like the hottest space. This is the sector everyone wants to be in. Everyone has to be in consumer offline. What's going to happen in 2019? Who knows? We'll see. But the reason I'm sort of bringing this out is, don't fundraise for the sake of fundraising. Or going with the trends or what people are saying. Raise because you have a plan that requires that capital. And I've got peers that made that mistake. A CEO should not be spending 99% of his time fundraising. They should be focused maybe a few percentage of that. It should be on building your business and driving your passion. That's what's critical. And unless you really have a key plan, you don't need the money then. Have a very key focus on what it is. So one of the things, can you go to the next slide? So one of the things we did, I think let's keep moving because I think we're on time. So just to talk about it a little. So the picture wasn't that rosy. Going back to that question we had earlier, and we did have a lot of conversations with different types of investors, family offices to venture capitalists, and so I thought it would be interesting for you guys who are either kickstarting this journey to see some of the responses we got, from investors in the beginning. So here's a great one, and some of you might have seen this already. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be for us, just too small given outside of our core focus this is. This is a typical response from a VC. That basically is, we don't like what you're doing. The other one was, we didn't get a response. Then we didn't get another response. Again, no response. Unfortunately, this is too small and too early stage for us. I also got an email later on that this is too big and too late for us. Love the business, love the traction, but we're too late. There you go. And these are actual response. No response, no response, no response. Realistically, it looks hard for us since we're keen to get more conversations going to understand the market better. I'm very sorry, truly appreciate you giving us a shot. Again, no response, no response. And these are actual emails I've copied and pasted here for you guys to see. So it wasn't rosy, it's not all easy. I think the reality is that in the beginning I got caught up in this, but later on I realized that I'm here to build a business. That's the key focus. And that's where that turning point came for that vision and the 5-year plan that came about. So some of my sort of takeaways, real quick, is an entrepreneur's job is his passion to build a business, not fundraise. This process can easily get you carried away. Don't get carried away. Focus on what's important, which is your business. Secondly, don't listen to trends. Don't listen to trends. This is so important. I have so many tech entrepreneurs who now want to enter consumer food. And because it's just a place to be right now. I get emails on a weekly basis saying, can you help us, can you advise us, can you mentor us? And my first question to them is this really a passion for you, or is it just you're reading the newspaper and you're reading that certain venture capitalists are investing in this space? What's really driving you? So I would say, don't listen to trends, listen to yourself. Something that we were core to from the beginning. And finally, this is my sort of thing that if you build it, they will come. The good investors are there, they're watching. If you're they'll reach out to you. Just like we had the guys that ended up investing in us reached out to us. The ones we reached out to ended up giving us those responses you saw, or no responses that you saw. So again, I think what's important here is focus on your business, focus on your plan, and it'll happen, is my view. And then finally, that first point I gave about ask for advice and you'll get the money. I think that's it for me. So thank you.